Good afternoon, friends and colleagues in the industry. Welcome to Texas. Welcome deep in the heart of Texas. And I was asked permission and given permission to say welcome to the Republic of Texas. Texas likes to think itself apart from the rest of the United States, and some ways they are, and they really are. They were a republic once, and sometimes they continue to act like an independent state within the United States. But welcome to the Republic of Texas. We hope you have a good, fruitful, enjoyable conference. I think the committees have put together a really interesting program that we hope you would derive a lot of benefit from. Those of you who've participated in conferences over the years, either Banknote or Currency Conference, would notice a certain theme when Rick Haycock would come up and talk about us. He always has these references to horse and buggy, the horse and buggy industry at the turn of the last century, just before the invention of the automobile. And inevitably, Rick would sometimes tease out a conclusion, or maybe not tease it out, but pose this provocative question: are we the horse and buggy industry of today? In his scenarios, he sometimes suggests that the same existential threat that horse and buggy and all the accessories around horses and buggies might be the same kind of threat we face today in our industry. And he always presents this very stark example of a binary choice. It's adapt and change, or die because of irrelevance. And the reality is, really, industries that face disruptive choices very rarely ever face these kinds of disruptive change or die. The reality is, industries and companies and stakeholders tend to evolve and expand and adjust to market conditions and customer concerns and stakeholders' input. And those adjustments contribute to resilience for the next stage of the evolution. And in fact, I had to research this and point it out because if you take Rick's scenario about the horse and buggy, and the scenario that, and he also had a buggy whip reference, there were companies back then in the turn of the 19th century that were evolving and starting to produce. These were leather goods company producing things like belts and sporting goods equipment, and industrial pulleys and the like. In fact, there's a company in 1913 that it's called Ashland Manufacturing. It used to be an old leather company that made seats for buggies. And it sort of evolved into something that we in the US now know as a Wilson Sports Company that makes footballs and equipment. And the companies that survived that transition were companies that were sensitive to the internal dynamics of their industry, and they were responsive to their customer requirements. So industries adjust, they change. And so too will banknotes. We will adjust, we will change. We are adjusting. We are already seeing this evolution, or continue to see this evolutionary path that's taking place. Just within the last 2 years, we've seen an extraordinary amount of change, not only in the central bank side, but also on the industry side. We have seen a large player fixed itself up and sold itself at a pretty nice price. At the same time, we have seen players in the industry looking to make additional investments, looking at new opportunities in this industry. We have seen some players doing real in-depth strategic analysis and assessment as to where they're going, where their future lies, and shed and divest of divisions that they no longer consider core to their enterprises. We have seen that some of these divisions have been sold to enterprising players, new players, people that are fresh and new to the industry. Rest assured that these new players are looking at banknotes and the banknote industry with a completely different perspective. These new owners are likely to be a vanguard for different thinking, innovation, resilience. We've seen a range of what these new owners to the industry are, right? We have a large, experienced industrial manufacturing firm, and we've seen private equity coming in and looking and seeing us with new eyes, fresh perspectives. And we also know that in addition to the people that have already made their presence known, there are people looking at us. There are funds that are looking at our industries, and there are private equity firms that are also looking and sensing opportunities. Folks, you don't get that in stodgy old industries that aren't changing. You don't get that enthusiasm. And those new people coming in will be that instrument that will compel us to evolve to the next level. On the central bank side, we have seen central banks reevaluating their role in the cash cycle. Some are taking action to retreat from the cash cycle and depending and relying on their commercial banking structure, while others are doing the reverse and advancing more and more into the cash cycle because they may have concerns about the institutional strength of their commercial banking system. Again, flux and change. We have seen central banks leading major technology drives to develop the next generation technology within our industry. Hopeful, very, very hopeful things. And we've seen central banks intervene in the marketplace so that they can be assured of access to a critical raw material for their banknotes. Again, something I don't think many of us have seen previously. So lots of dynamism. And we've actually seen central banks that are making decisions and actions that also impact the profitability of suppliers, and in one case, maybe even impact the survivability of a commercial player. It is an interesting thing that will continue to give us the resilience that we need as an industry. So as you can see, there are an awful lot of internally driven evolutions and pressures within our industry that will compel us to get better and get more efficient. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention one external factor, one obvious external factor that some people think would cause us to change as well. On a macro level, we are beginning to see some changes in banknotes, or that could be an existential threat, or at least people perceive it as such. People believe that fiat currency is at the end of its life. We know of several central banks that are working with cryptocurrency companies on blockchain technology and the distributed ledger. And those central banks are actually evaluating and making a determination if there's actually a place for central banks within the blockchain technology or within its payment regime. Look, these central banks are curious, just like we are curious about this new and this interesting technology. But let me assure you one thing. Look, there will be threats to banknotes in the future, but it's not going to come from blockchain. It's a definitive statement, and I'm very confident of that. Blockchain will not lead to the demise of banknotes. For one thing, blockchain transactions are way too slow to ever become a real payment option. Blockchain technology might have a future role as a stored value in the stored value space, but not as a platform. But even if the crypto technologists were able to resolve the pacing issue and the speed issue associated with blockchain, they have another problem. Well, they have many problems, but I'll only highlight one. The core intrinsic value of blockchain is the data. And that data is visible and it's public. As you know, modern companies find value in data. Owning the data, manipulating the data. So it's difficult for me to see why Citibank or Morgan Stanley, who are using blockchain for trading and investment, though it's difficult for me to see them use that platform where the data is public and visible. It makes no sense that somebody will invest in a data that's public and you can't leverage it. So I'm here to say, based on that, banknotes will have a lot more time to remain relevant. But in order for us to continue to be relevant, we must continue to execute on our strategies. We must not lose sight of the process innovations that will make us more efficient and more resilient. The threat to banknotes exists only if we don't innovate, if we don't respond to our stakeholders, if we're not responsive to the changing environment. And so it gives me great pleasure for me to introduce someone who has been innovating and who has been responding to customers' evolving demands. You know, the Brinks Company is at the forefront of innovation and efficiency and resilience in the cash cycle. And they have been tested all over the United States and continually come up and prove their resilience. Doug Pertz is the President, Chief Executive Officer, and Director of the Brinks Company, and has served in these roles since June 2016. He has led global companies as the CEO over the past 20 years, and throughout his career, he has guided multinational corporations and organizations through both operational turnaround and growth acceleration. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Doug Pertz.